Hi everyone, a very good evening to all of you. I hope I am visible, audible. Could you please confirm it once? Hello Shanavaz. All right. I hope. Good evening Chahat. Visible, audible. I am well, thank you for asking. All right. Thank you for confirming that. Hello Akanksha. Hello Manas. Good evening Pritikana. Hi Himanshu. All right, new here, so welcome to the session. Hi Neelu, good evening. Good evening Frank Tube. Right, so how are you all? How is the prep going? And have you been attending the editorial comprehension sessions? If you attended the previous session, did you attempt the ZAT 2018 passage that I talked to you about, the one about the hard problem of consciousness? First session, all right, welcome. So do give it a shot, okay? So do watch the previous session. There I have talked about the hard problem of consciousness in a passage, and then I suggested another passage from ZAT 2018 for your solving, right? That also talks about the hard problem of consciousness, so that the concept will be crystal clear to you. Okay? All right. Okay, Chahat. So let's resume from today. Yes. And today I have brought to you a piece from a book. Okay, so the source of this piece is a book called Occidentalism, right? So can you tell me what do you understand by this term Occidentalism? Have you heard of the term Orientalism? What do you understand by that term? And how is Occidentalism related to that? Okay. Waiting for your responses. I've read a political philosophy topic. Oh, okay. So let's see if this one offers something new. So Orientalism is the study of the East by the West. So the study of, let's say, Eastern culture, Eastern societies by Western people. That is Orientalism. Okay. And usually the term is used to describe how the West tends to create its own narrative of the East. Okay, it tries to present the East in a certain light as something that is exotic and something, earlier when colonial narratives were present, as something that was uncultured as well. So that is Orientalism. Okay, now Occidentalism is the opposite idea. The study of the West by the East. So the study of Western nations, Western culture by Eastern people. This is called Occidentalism. Okay, the study, the representation, and it could come with its own biases as well, right? With its own reactions to Orientalism as well. So this book is called Occidentalism, the West in the Eyes of Its Enemies, right? That's the name of the book. And of course the genre, as you've understood, would be political philosophy, and the word count is 557 words, which is usual for your CAT RC passages, right? Yes, so basically the stereotypes that we have perhaps towards the West, that is what this book could highlight potentially. Okay, so what we have is an excerpt from the first chapter of the book, right? This first chapter was also published in the New York Times, so that is where I have picked it from, right? Okay, now let's start. So I have just tried to put the passage in on two slides, so that in case we have to come back to the slides while attempting questions, it's easier. We don't have to navigate many slides, right? So that's why you may feel that there's a lot on each slide today, but again, read it paragraph by paragraph, okay, and you'll be good to go. All right then. So first you'll read, okay, and then we can have a discussion in case you haven't understood anything. The language today is easier as compared to what we did, let's say, in the last class, right? So the language shouldn't really pose a lot of challenge. So let's begin. Start reading and let me know once you're done. Done? Others? Okay. All right. Interesting question, Manas. We'll discuss that. Okay. So, uh, do you want me to explain some of this, or are we good to go? Should I explain this after we have after we have attempted the questions? Tell me. Good to go. Perfect. Perfect. Uh, just this one thing, excoriated. What does this word mean? Excoriate. So we are talking about this meeting that happened in Kyoto, right? And these are Japanese intellectuals. They seem to be criticizing the West, but it says that it's quite hard to define the West itself, isn't it? Excoriate is to, yes, criticize severely. Criticize severely. Upbraid, absolutely correct. Right? Okay. Let's see the next slide then. All right, two of you have completed reading. What about others? Perfect, perfect. Okay, so there are certain words here as well, but okay, let's first attempt the questions, then I'll discuss the entire passage with you, right, in one go. So let's see the first question. It says, why does the author mention Sumura Hideo's praise of Leni Riefenstahl's films? So you can read the options and then we can go back to that area where this is done. All right, let's see. Red. Okay, let's go back then to the first question. I've got my first response. What about others? Okay. So D, C, what else? All right. Okay. 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 All right. So why does the author mention Sumura Hideo's praise? So why is he praising Leni Riefenstahl's films? That's the question. Yes. So we went back and we saw this from here to here. So a leading film critic, Sumura Hideo, criticized Hollywood movies, okay, and praised the documentary films of this person about Nazi rallies. Now imagine these are about Nazi rallies, right, which were more in tune, now see, which were more in tune with his ideas on how to forge a healthy national community. So these were more aligned with this idea, with the idea of Sumura Hideo's. Now Sumura Hideo is also a Japanese intellectual, right? We are talking about these Japanese intellectuals who are blaming various things, right? And they were saying that these things have to be overcome. So now a film critic, he said that he criticized Hollywood movies, and what did he praise in turn? Okay, these documentary films that showed Nazi rallies. So these were more in tune with his ideas on how to forge a healthy national community. Okay, and we are again dealing with this idea of national identity here, no? That the Japanese national identity, how these intellectuals felt that probably that had faded away. In his view, the war against the West was a war against the poisonous materialist civilization, and we have put this in quotes just to show that the author is not saying this. These are perhaps the words used in the documentary or the words of Sumura Hideo. So in his view, this was a war against the poisonous materialist civilization built on Jewish financial capitalist power. So do you see even the language that has been used is also very well aligned with the language of Hitler. It's anti-Semitic, it's against Jews. Okay, so probably, these are the ideas that were popularized by the Nazi regime. Okay, so now let's go back. So why does the author mention this praise? What is the author trying to achieve by mentioning this praise? Okay, so A says to highlight the aesthetic admiration that some Japanese intellectuals had for European fascist propaganda. So aesthetic, is it concerned with beauty, or the ideas of thinking that our national identity or our the idea of a healthy national community is more aligned with what Nazism is trying to do? So this is not about aesthetics, it's not about beauty, okay, and therefore this is eliminated. To show how intellectual resistance to the West ironically borrowed Western forms of media and expression. Do you see any hint of irony when the author has talked about Shimura Hideo? Yes. Do you see any hint of irony that the author is being ironic? I didn't find that the author was being ironic or sarcastic, right? So the author is not trying to show that how the intellectual resistance to the West ironically borrowed Western forms of media and expression. So we are not, and Shimura Hideo was not actually looking at the Nazi at this documentary as something Western, right? He was not looking at this documentary as something Western. He was looking at this documentary as representing a critique of materialism, which is how they looked at the West as well. That it was materialistic, poisonously materialistic. Okay, now we are left with C and D. C says to contrast the perceived communalism of traditional Japan with the individualism of Hollywood. Okay, so now a lot of you said this, that the author is trying to the author has showed this idea of praise to contrast the perceived communalism of traditional Japan with the individualism of Hollywood. But the question is about the praise of this person's films. It is not about how we are critiquing Hollywood, the individualism of Hollywood, right? So the answer also has to be, why was this praised? We found it relatable, right? This particular intellectual, he found it relatable. Why did he find it relatable? Because he felt that it was more in tune with his idea of a healthy national community. So actually, the author is trying to illustrate the extent of ideological alignment between Japanese nationalism and European totalitarianism. Because here, this idea is totalitarian, right? That the war against the West was a war against poisonous materialist civilization. So this idea is actually the totalitarian idea of Hitler, right? Yes, so it's to show the alignment of thoughts. Okay, so in fact, it's the author is very subtly critical here. Look at this language, science was to blame. First of all, the author says they were not clear who that enemy was, right? So they were not very clear about who this enemy was. Here we say that they had strong feelings about what they were up against, but had some difficulty defining exactly what that was. Yes, what they were up against. Then they are saying science was to blame, and so were capitalism and the absorption of modern technology and individual freedoms and democracy. And look at this repetition of and, that all of these were to blame. All these had to be overcome. And this leading film critic in fact aligned with, let's say, the Nazi ideas, right? So the Western civilization was seen as shallow, and the Japanese imperial rule was seen as divine. Do you see that? Okay, so the Japanese imperial rule is also, imperialism is also a sort of a totalitarian ideology, isn't it? And that was something that was seen as divine. So there was this alignment that was felt between Japanese nationalism and European totalitarianism in the eyes of Shimura Hideo. Not in the author's eyes. Okay? Does this make sense? Why D? Why not the other options? This is not about communalism. It is trying to it's a sort of a justification of this anti-Western sentiment. Even if it aligned, even if the anti-Western sentiment took the form of totalitarianism or imperialism. Right? Hence D. This was a difficult question, okay? I intended it to be difficult. Alright. Now, let's have a look at the second one. So, which of the following best reflects the passage's implied view of Japan's modernization during the Meiji period? Do we want to go back? You can always tell me. Yes. So please go back. So the Meiji period is, yeah, here. Red. All right, let's go. All right. Okay. Okay. So B, A, D, that's what I've got. Alright, why don't more of you respond? Yes. No negative marking here. Yes, right in the session. So, one student has answered this correctly. The answer is A. Okay, now why A? That's the question. Because B looks like the answer that we should jump to in a way. Yes? Wholesale word is given in the passage. So, why not this? Look at this. Imitation. Right? So, let's see. The passage's implied view. How does the passage look at Japan's modernization during the Meiji period? Let's go back. Let's see. So, here, see this. The West to Asians at that time, and to some extent still today, also meant colonialism. Since the middle of the 19th century, when China was humiliated in the Opium Wars, educated Japanese realized that national survival depended on careful study and emulation of Western ideas and technology. Right? So we had to carefully study. Okay, now I understand that emulation can give you the impression that it was imitation, but read further. Okay, it was based on a careful study and it was adapted. So it was not a wholesale imitation. Wholesale imitation would mean that you're not even adapting it, right? So we had adapted those ideas. That's one thing. Another thing is the author's view towards this positive? Is it negative? What does the author think about all of this this transformation that happened? The author is actually saying that, see, first of all, national survival depended on this, right? And it paid off handsomely. The transformation paid off handsomely. So actually it was a pragmatic strategy. It was the practical thing to do because your survival depended on it. If you were Japan, your survival depended on it, and it also gave you good returns, right? So the main slogan was civilization and enlightenment, which meant Western civilization and enlightenment, right? Everything Western, from this to this was hungrily soaked up. So it was enthusiastically adopted by Japanese intellectuals. Okay, there are examples are given to us. They were taken over and adapted, right? So that is what we are talking about. Okay, now, so a pragmatic strategy that helped Japan gain global stature. It did help Japan, right? It remained uncolonized and quickly became a great power that managed in 1905 to defeat Russia in a thoroughly modern war. Okay, so it did pay off handsomely. So that helped Japan gain global stature, though it triggered a cultural unease that surfaced only decades later. Yes, so it did trigger a cultural unease because, see, this period was from 1850s, between 1850s and 1910s, and it triggered this unease when, leading up to 1942. So we are talking about a few decades later. So it triggered this unease decades later. So now this wasn't as quick as we think, right? Fine, we are talking about the fact that we tried to do too much too quickly, right? That the Japanese people, they tried to westernize too much too quickly. This has been talked about, but the quickness is not in terms of regret, right? The quickness is not in terms of regret. Okay, also this regret is a sort of a loaded word, that the nation quickly came to regret. So there is an unease that we can witness in the intellectuals discussion, but is there a regret? Okay, do they lament it? Are they saying, oh my god, what have we done? Okay, so regret is a stronger word. So do you see there are multiple problems with option B? Wholesale? No, it was adapted. It was not a wholesale imitation. Okay, then the nation didn't quickly come to regret it. Okay, the unease, not even regret, the unease happened decades later, right? And regret is a strong word. We do see unease, but they are not like, oh my god, what have we done, as I said. Does that make sense? So A is the answer. C says a modern effort driven by colonial anxieties but marked by reluctance and lack of genuine cultural engagement, that they were, pretty reluctant about it. Were they? Because it says it was hungrily soaked up. When you hungrily soak up something, that means you are very eager and enthusiastic about it. So no, we can't say that it was marked by reluctance. They were not reluctant. Okay. D says a balanced synthesis of foreign knowledge and native tradition. Was it balanced though? That preserved Japan's spiritual core. Then we would not even need this Kyoto meeting, no? So this is incorrect. This is going against what the passage says. So I hope this is clear. Why A is the answer. Yes. So, these are traps. So again, I would say this was a tricky question. I again didn't intend to make it easy, okay, because I knew that when you read the word wholesale in the passage, it kind of sticks. The word emulation sticks. So therefore you might not notice that it says that it was adapted, right? Okay. So you had to really evaluate the strategy in its entirety, what happened during the Meiji period. Colonial anxiety, yes. So colonial anxiety, there was a bit of an anxiety, that a fear, actually we should call it a fear, that we might be invaded, we might be humiliated, just like China was humiliated. There was that fear, yes. However, uh, it wasn't just this fear, it was also the practicality of the whole thing. Japan also wanted to become a great power. Yes. Okay, let's see the third question. So read the question carefully. Yes, it says in response to colonialism. So I've got 2 responses. What about others? What was the motivation? This is very clearly stated. No, we have just read it. So the educated Japanese realized that national survival depended on careful study and emulation of Western ideas and technology. This is the context of colonialism, that discussion on colonialism, right? So absolutely correct. The answer is C. Okay, so do you see that, a thorough understanding of this when you read about the Meiji period? Okay, what were the motivations, what was the consequence? This also helps you to attempt this question, right? It's an analogy question. Okay, perfect. So easy this was. Okay, let's see this one. Read it carefully. It's an assumption question. Okay, so yeah. The first slide, okay. Red. Let's go to the, okay, the second one. Okay, we can't reread the entire passage. Okay, so let's go to the questions. The options. Okay. So I've got 2 responses. Yes. What about others? All right. This is actually easy because, okay, first I want 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Just 5 responses. What about others? A lot of you are saying C. Okay, this is interesting. C. The passage's argument is that Japan's attempt to overcome the modern in 1942 stemmed partly from a cultural reaction to the psychological and societal effects of rapid westernization, right? So it wasn't just economic. That's what our second slide says. That fine, there were these bad economic consequences, but economic problems aside, there was another reason many Japanese intellectuals sought to undo the wholesale westernization of the late 19th century. It was as though Japan suffered from intellectual indigestion. Western civilization had been swallowed too fast. Yes, and that is partly why that group of literati gathered in Kyoto to discuss ways of reversing history, overcoming the West, and returning to an idealized spiritual past. So they felt that, because we had tried to adopt the Western civilization too fast, it had led to a sort of a cultural erosion for us, right? A sort of a social erosion for us. Okay, it has had effects for our national identity. So that is what they felt. So this attempt to overcome the modern was not just about the economic consequences, the bad economic consequences, the negative economic consequences that they were facing, right? The economic problems that they were facing. So partly this was the reason. Yes. So what assumption is most necessary for this argument to hold, that partly this is the reason? If you say Japanese intellectuals in the 1940s had an accurate understanding of the effects of westernization on their society. Okay. Let's say they did not. They did not have an accurate understanding. Okay. Of the effects of westernization on their society. Then does this argument collapse entirely? Does this collapse entirely? That they did not have an accurate understanding, but it could still partly stem from a cultural reaction. Despite their understanding not being entirely accurate, it could still stem from a cultural reaction. Yes, so this is about Japan's attempt. This is not just about Japanese intellectuals' attempt. Do you see? So I am talking about the nation as a whole. So their understanding does not really matter, to be honest. I thought that you would narrow down to B and D. Did that happen for some of you? Narrowing down to B and D? These were the 2 close options. So B says cultural responses to modernization, so reaction responses, cultural reaction to modernization are often as much about identity. Okay, so I think when we talk about and memory, so you must have related it to societal and psychological, as they are about economics and politics. So do you see there is a comparison that is happening here, that the social effects and psychological effects, they hold as much importance in bringing out a cultural reaction as do economic effects. As much, if I look at this word, as much about this as they are about this. So is B not saying this? Memory, our spiritualized past, they are trying to say that we have this past that we seem to have forgotten, isn't it? So that's their concern. So this option is saying this. Now let's negate it. If I say that no, cultural responses are more about economic effects, or if I say they are more about social and psychological effects, then will this collapse? They will still remain partly the reasons, right? They will still remain the reasons in part. One could have more impact than the other. They can still remain the part of the reasons. Do you see? So B can weaken perhaps, or B can B can in a way, like, if it's an assumption, it is something that is supporting. Yes, this is something that is supporting, not weakening, I'm sorry. It is something that is supporting the argument here, but it is not a necessary assumption. Okay, something that is necessary for the argument to hold. On the other hand, let's negate this. So if I negate this, the argument will collapse. The rejection of modernity in Japan can be fully explained by economic disruptions alone. If it can be fully explained by economic disruptions alone, then can I say that this was stemmed partly from a cultural reaction to the psychological and societal effects? No, then this does not remain even a part of the reason. Do you see this? Why D is the answer? Why D is stronger, a stronger candidate than B, Bangalore? एक सही हुआ. Okay, good. So this was, see, I intend to bring difficult questions in the editorial series, right? Because if I bring easy, then you can attempt them easily. At intervals, I have brought easy to moderate passages as well. But my primary intention on most days is to bring you some difficult RCs. Okay, now we can have a general discussion since we have attempted the question. So now we can discuss this passage, right? So this passage talks about a gathering in Kyoto in 1942. So what time period is this? Good Manas. What time period is this? 1942. World War II is going on. Yes, it was going on, right? And in 1941, Japan had attacked Pearl Harbor, forcing the entry of US into the war, right? So this is the background in which all of this is happening. So of course they would hate everything US at that time. They would think that the West is coldly mechanical. And this was the time of the Japanese, where the Japanese imperial rule was very, very strong, right? So still, some modernization, some embracing of the modern had happened, and these intellectuals had strong feelings against this. That why is it that our country has embraced this modern? Because to them, modern meant the West, right? And the author is trying to draw a parallel by saying that even today, these anti-Western sentiments remain in certain pockets of the world, right? So it was, Westernization was like a disease. That's what they felt, but they were not able to pinpoint what exactly West was. That was the problem, right? And so there was a lot of discussion about how, specialization in knowledge is unhealthy, how it was destroying the wholeness of our spiritual, Oriental, Eastern spiritual culture, how Western science was, perhaps very clinical, mechanical. Capitalism again was criticized. All of these things were criticized. Okay, even individual freedoms and democracy. Why? Because this was the time of imperial rule, the king. Yes, what is the tone of this passage? What do you think is the author's tone? All these had to be overcome. So look at these other paragraphs as well. Critical. Okay, let's frame these as options. Okay, A, critical. What other options? No, Simran, we don't need to know this necessarily. It's just to increase your knowledge. It's a critique. So a critique, when I say critique, a critique tends to be relatively more balanced. Yes. So the tone there would be analytical. Okay. Descriptive. Do you think this is descriptive? Just descriptive. I don't think this is purely descriptive, because the author is, very subtly showing their stance as well by distancing themselves from different things, right? By using the way they frame their sentences. Science was to blame, and so were capitalism and the absorption of modern technology and individual freedoms and democracy. So they were blaming so many things. That's what the author is trying to highlight, right? They were not clear about who the enemy was. Okay, so actually this is analytical. Primarily the tone of this particular piece is analytical, but there is a very subtle hint of critique as well, right? As in criticism as well. But that is very subtle. So primarily if I have to choose between these three, it will be analytical, not purely critical. The highlighting of negatives is not very outright. Okay? So right, it's not entirely factual, correct. So the tone is analytical. Good question this was. So in fact, even when we are talking about this film critique, Sumura Hideo, look at how the author distances themselves. So the author says, which were more in tune. Okay, so in his view, this is his view. Okay, the war against the West was a war against the poisonous materialist civilization. Again, putting something is in quotes is a way of distancing, showing that these are somebody else's words, not mine. Okay, all agreed that culture, now see the author is explaining, see by culture they meant traditional Japanese culture. To them this was culture, was spiritual and profound, whereas modern Western civilization was shallow, rootless and destructive of creative power. Okay, so they felt that we needed to return to this holistic classical orient. We needed to restore this so that our warm organic community could be nursed back to spiritual health. Okay, so this, as one of the participants put it, again the author is just trying to show you, see, I am just giving you the views of these people. Yes, these are not my views. So the struggle was between Japanese blood and Western intellect. Then how is this analytical? This is analytical because the author is sort of dissecting their motivations, what were their views, then what was the motivation in the Meiji period behind adopting some of the Western views, what were its consequences, right? How it was positive also, this consequence, but then it brought along with it some problems as well. So that is the analysis that is happening. Okay, do we know about the Opium Wars? If not, you can read a bit about the Opium Wars. Why did they happen, right? So how the China suffered a humiliating defeat at the hands of the British in the Opium Wars. They were purely exploitative. How India was also involved, right? So this you can read a bit about. Then I think now this will be pretty clear to you what happened during the Meiji period, a period in Japan. Yes. What is enlightenment? Do read about enlightenment again in case you don't know about it. In brief, it was a time period in the West, after the Renaissance. So after the Renaissance, we had two movements. One was enlightenment. Okay. And there was one more. It was it came under the subcategory of enlightenment itself, but this was the period when, people started questioning things rationally. Okay, empiricism also progressed. People said that we will believe only in things that can be observed, that you can provide us a logic for. So the political implication was that why should I accept the authority of the government? What is the rationale? Provide me with a rationale. So this was a time period of a lot of revolutions also in the West, right? The French Revolution, even the Russian Revolution, if I'm not wrong, it happened, somewhere during this period, the Bolshevik Revolution. So this was the time, right? So why does history revolves around the West? No, India is also involved here. No, Opium Wars. So basically what the Britishers were doing was they would make India manufacture opium, okay, and that too forcefully, and then they would sell it to China again, or let's say they would at least put it on Chinese ports. They were also selling it to China forcefully again. China was against this because it was resulting in a lot of social problems in their society. But the Britishers were powerful. When China resisted, they initiated a war against them, and China lost these wars. There were two Opium Wars, right? So India is involved. It is there, right? It participated in World War II as a colony. Okay, so yes, but then the West dominates. We can't do much about it. We can't go and change history as these people were trying to do, right? So I hope a bit of this passage is clear to you, right? Literary realism simply means writing books that talk about real people's real problems. So basically focus on the ordinary people, especially the middle class, their problems. That is literary realism. Okay, writing such novels, such books. Literati, people who are very well read. Okay, so yes, do find more about enlightenment, find out about opium wars. You can read a bit about Pearl Harbor, World War II, and yes, the ultimately the US dropping bombs on Hiroshima, Nagasaki. What were the motivations? Right here also, what were the motivations? What were the consequences? A good way to make yourself aware of, in fact, both of these is this collection of essays called Hiroshima Note by Kenzaburo A. Right? So it's quite interesting. You can read this. What is fascism? Yes. Or what is fascist? So fascism, I think I explained this in a previous session. So Benito Mussolini, the Italian autocrat, Italian dictator, he came up with this term fascism. In Italy, fasces is actually a bundle of rope through which an axe runs. Okay, basically tied around an axe, which symbolizes power. So fascism is a totalitarian ideology. Totalitarian means when you want total control over your citizens. Okay, extreme regimentation, total control. Okay, expansionist tendency, you just want to expand your control even to other territories, right? You want to suppress some minorities. So this is what Benito Mussolini also did in Italy. Okay, his party's name was the fascist party, just like Hitler's party's name was the Nazi party. And actually Hitler borrowed a lot from fascism when he created his own brand, right? So yes, this is a totalitarian ideology, and yes, it does involve a dictator or an autocrat, a totalitarian leader at the helm. Okay, all right. So how to increase accuracy in VRC answers? Should I reduce the number of attempts 10 to 12 and get 6 to 7 correct often? Okay, all right. So how to increase accuracy? So first of all, analysis helps, because that will make you observe, okay, why is it that the others went wrong? And moreover, yes, you can consider increasing your number of attempts as well. Okay, because if 6 to 7, I mean, in case it's 50%, then it's relatively low accuracy. In case it's 7 on 10, then it's decent for you to actually consider increasing your attempts, right? Okay, next class will be on Wednesday at 5 p.m. Okay, see you. Each type of verbal question so that we can get better at it. Preeti, gonna focus on practicing RC passages. Okay, in case a particular question type is problematic for you, then yes, focus more on that question type. Otherwise, just go for mixed RC passages. All right. So just see if it's because of a particular question type, or is it because of elimination. So this could also be the problem. On YouTube, I see you on Wednesday and Friday at 5 p.m. Okay, and we are also planning to bring in a new series on Friday. So we'll continue with the editorial sessions on Wednesday and bring in an RC series, RC practice series, RC gym on Friday. So we are planning that. Okay, maybe from next Friday we'll implement it. All right. Okay, then I'll see you next time. Bye bye.